Something happened last night that nobody expected. The room was normal at first. People were talking, laughing, and saying small things that did not matter. Then your person went quiet. Just like that. The mood changed. Their eyes dropped. Their face shifted. It looked like they were holding back something heavy, something they had hidden for a very long time. One friend noticed right away and softly asked what was wrong, but at first there was no answer. The whole room became still. Even the tiny sounds in the background felt far away. It was clear that something deep inside them was fighting to come out. For so long they had acted like nothing had changed. They pretended they were fine. They pretended your memory no longer touched them. They pretended your name did not pass through their mind when the room was empty and nobody was there to see the truth. But last night, the silence became too heavy to carry. Then, in a voice lower than anyone expected, they finally said they were ready to be honest. And once those words came out, everything shifted. Their friends understood right away that this was not a small confession. This was something they had been avoiding for a long time, something hidden behind pride, something pushed under excuses, something delayed again and again because facing it felt too hard. For a second it looked like they might stop there, but they did not. And you need to stay with this, because what came next changed the entire night. They leaned back, took a slow breath, and kept going. They said every distraction had failed. Every attempt to move on had somehow led them back to the same place. Every effort to forget only made the memories stronger. No matter what they did, one thought kept returning. You. Your energy, your presence, the space you left behind. They admitted they once thought time would erase it all, but time had done the opposite. It had made everything clearer. One of their closest friends looked stunned. This was the first time they had spoken with full honesty. Before this night, they always seemed sure of themselves, always calm, always in control. If anyone asked questions, they gave half answers and changed the subject before it got too deep. But last night, there was no place left to hide, no performance, no careful words, no polished excuse, only truth. They admitted that some nights had become much longer than they wanted to admit. Old thoughts came back without warning. Words you once said returned to their mind with sharp detail. Moments they believed were gone suddenly felt alive again. Even simple things started reminding them of what they once felt and never fully faced. Then one friend asked the question hanging in the room. Why now? Why say all this now? The answer came slowly. Because something had changed inside. Because silence no longer felt safe. Because pretending had become heavier than telling the truth. Because they finally understood that some feelings do not die just because they are ignored. And that was only the beginning. What they said after that went even deeper. As the conversation went on, the room grew quieter. Your person explained that lately your memory had been showing up in strange moments. Quiet evenings, ordinary afternoons, random conversations that had nothing to do with you. It would happen without warning, and every time it happened, the same truth came back with it. What they had buried was still alive. One friend tried to interrupt, but your person kept talking, almost like they knew the courage might disappear if they stopped. They admitted that while other people seemed to move forward easily, they still felt emotionally unfinished. A part of them was still tied to something unresolved, something they had never named properly, something they had never truly understood. Then they said something that made the whole room fall silent. They were afraid that by the time they finally understood what was true, the chance to say it might already be gone. That line hit hard, because suddenly this was no longer just confession. This was regret starting to show its face. Another friend asked if they had ever truly let go. This time there was no pause, no confusion, no soft answer. They said no, they had never truly let go. That truth landed harder than anything before it. They explained that they had hidden behind distance because admitting attachment felt dangerous. They told themselves that staying quiet would slowly make the feelings disappear. But the opposite happened. As time passed, everything became sharper. They remembered small details nobody else would understand. Tiny moments stayed bright, while other memories faded away. And that unsettled them, because it proved that some connections leave marks too deep for pride to erase. Keep listening, because this is where the night began to open all the way. Then they admitted something even deeper. There had been moments when they almost reached out. Moments when they nearly broke the silence. Moments when they opened a message, looked at the screen, and said nothing. Their friends exchanged surprised looks. None of them knew the feelings had stayed active for so long. The conversation turned quiet again, but the deepest truth still had not been spoken. After another long pause, your person finally said they were no longer sure if hiding their feelings had protected them or cost them something important. Nobody rushed to answer. Everyone felt the weight of those words. Because once someone reaches that point, something inside them has already started to change. That was what made last night different from every night before it. It was not just a confession, it was the start of real honesty after a long season of avoidance. Then one friend asked a final question. If the chance appeared right now, what would you say? Your person looked away. A faint smile crossed their face, the kind of smile that carries hope and sadness at the same time. Then they admitted the truth should have been spoken much earlier. The room stayed silent, but now the silence felt different. Everyone understood that something hidden had finally been opened. Most people thought that was the end of it. It was not. Your person kept going, and now there was no pride left in the way. They admitted that for years they had tried to explain their feelings through logic. They made reasons. They built stories that sounded smart. They tried to turn emotion into something simple and controlled, but none of those explanations matched what was really happening inside. The truth was much simpler and much harder. No matter how far they tried to move, something in them kept returning to the same unfinished place. For the first time, they stopped running from that place. For the first time, they let themselves sit with it. For the first time, they admitted that some feelings stay because they were never fully understood. Maybe that was the biggest realization of all. Not that the feelings survived, but that they survived despite every attempt to bury them. Despite time, despite distance, despite silence, despite pride. The truth remained, and now it had been spoken out loud. One friend leaned forward and carefully asked whether the feelings had grown stronger recently. Your person took a breath, paused, and nodded. It was only a small movement, but it said everything. Everyone in the room understood this was not a passing thought. It was not some short-lived emotion. This had been growing quietly under the surface for longer than anyone knew. Then they admitted there had been nights when old memories came back without warning. Details they thought were gone forever suddenly returned with clear shape. Specific words, certain looks, small moments that once seemed ordinary and now felt impossible to forget. Even they were surprised by it. They had not been searching for those memories. They had not invited them back. Yet they kept appearing anyway, like some deeper part of them refused to let the connection disappear completely. A friend asked if they had ever truly convinced themselves it was over. A faint smile appeared, but it was not a happy one. It was the smile of someone realizing they had been pretending for a very long time. They admitted, yes, they had told themselves many times that it was finished. Enough time had passed. The silence meant closure. Life had moved on. But every time they started believing that, something small would happen. A random thought, a memory, a feeling rising out of nowhere, and suddenly what seemed finished felt unfinished all over again. The room became even quieter after that. Everyone listened more closely. Then came another confession that surprised even their closest friends. Your person admitted that lately they had been comparing ordinary moments in life to something they once felt and never fully understood. They had met new people, they had stayed busy, they had filled their days with plans, noise, and distractions. But none of it carried the same quiet impact. None of it reached the same place in their heart. None of it created the same feeling. That changed everything, because now this was no longer only about memory. It was about recognition. It was about finally seeing clearly after a long time of blur. One friend finally asked what everyone else was thinking. Were they saying the feelings had never really disappeared? Your person looked straight ahead and answered without hesitation. They may have stopped talking about it, but they never stopped carrying it. That line settled over the room like weight. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then someone who had stayed quiet until then asked why they had hidden these feelings for so long, if they were still there. This answer came slowly. Your person said that sometimes people hide the truth because saying it out loud makes it real. And once it becomes real, it asks something from you. It demands attention. It forces you to face what you delayed. It forces you to see what you misunderstood. It forces you to confront what you may have risked losing by staying silent too long. The room went still again. This was no longer casual talk. This was someone speaking from a place they had avoided for years. Then another confession came. They admitted there had been recent moments when they almost reached out, almost chose honesty, almost broke the silence, but stopped themselves because they did not know if the moment still belonged to them. That uncertainty had kept them frozen. Then they said something even deeper. The hardest lesson was learning that feelings do not always disappear just because they become quiet. Sometimes emotions stop asking for attention. Sometimes they fade into the background. Sometimes they stay silent for months or years. But silence does not always mean absence. Some feelings wait, quietly, patiently, until one strange night arrives, the kind of night when hiding becomes harder than telling the truth. And for your person, last night became that night. One friend asked whether they believed those feelings still mattered. The answer came fast. If the feelings did not matter, they would not still be thinking about the words left unsaid. They would not still be wondering about lost chances. They would not still be carrying questions with no answers. That statement stayed in the air long after it was spoken, because regret does not stay alive for no reason. It does not keep talking unless something valuable is still attached to it. Then their voice changed again. For the first time that night, they admitted something they had never shared before, not even with their closest friends. There had been moments when they imagined what would happen if honesty came too late. Moments when they wondered if silence had already changed more than they knew. Moments when they feared that missing the right time had become the one mistake they could never fully fix. Their friends listened carefully. What they saw now was not hesitation, it was sincerity. There were no defenses left, no polished explanations, no effort to look unaffected, only truth. Then one friend softly asked what they would do if another chance still existed. Your person looked down, took a long breath, and after several silent seconds admitted that if another chance still existed, they would not waste any more time pretending there was nothing left to say. That answer changed the direction of the whole conversation, because now this was not only about the past, it was about possibility. No one thought the conversation could go deeper, but it did. After that answer, your person stopped holding back completely. A friend asked what had finally pushed them to admit everything after hiding it so long. Your person stayed quiet for a moment, not because there was no answer, but because the answer carried more emotion than they wanted anyone to see. Then they admitted that something small had happened earlier that day. Not a message, not a dramatic event, not a direct conversation, just a simple reminder that came out of nowhere and brought everything back at once. It hit during a moment when they were telling themselves they had already moved on. And that contradiction shook them. How could someone say they were over it if one small reminder could still change their whole mood? How could they call it the past if it still had that much power? That question stayed with them all day. The more they thought about it, the harder it became to keep pretending. Someone asked if they carried those feelings every single day. Your person answered honestly, not every day. Life got busy. Work, responsibilities, noise and distraction sometimes filled the space. There were days when they hardly thought about it at all. But the feeling returned often enough that it could no longer be called random. It returned often enough that it could no longer be pushed aside. It returned often enough that they had to finally admit what they had been avoiding. Something inside had never fully let go. That answer made the room still again. Everyone understood there is a difference between remembering someone once in a while and realizing they return to your mind far more often than they should. Then came another hard confession. There had been moments when they laughed with other people while part of their mind drifted somewhere else. Moments when conversations went on around them, but inside they were quietly comparing. Comparing feelings, comparing energy, comparing what felt real and what felt incomplete. The more they noticed those comparisons, the harder they became to ignore. Because every comparison led back to the same place, a place they had never fully closed, a place they had never truly left behind. Then they revealed something heavier. There had been nights when they came close to being fully honest with themselves, nights when the truth sat right in front of them, nights when they nearly accepted what they already knew. But every time, they stopped. Because honesty would have forced them to admit that distance had never really changed what remained inside. One friend asked if they were afraid of what all this meant. This time the answer came right away. Yes, they were afraid. Not of the feelings themselves, but of what full acceptance would take away. If they accepted the truth completely, there would be no excuses left, no clean explanation, no safe wall to hide behind. Pretending had become protection, distance had become an excuse, silence had become a shield. For a long time, those things helped them avoid hard questions. But last night, all three began to break apart. Then another truth came out. They said they had listened to other people speak confidently about moving on. They heard advice about forgetting, advice about letting go, advice about focusing on the future. Some of it sounded wise, some of it made sense, but none of it touched the part of them that still felt unfinished. Advice can shape choices. Advice can guide action, but advice cannot erase something that still feels real. Then a friend asked one last question. What would be hardest to admit if everything became fully honest right now? Your person answered without delay. The hardest truth was realizing how much time had been spent acting unaffected. For so long they waited for clarity to show up by itself. They hoped understanding would arrive quietly. They hoped time would do the work. But clarity did not come softly. It came that night, in that room, through words they had avoided for far too long. Then something unexpected happened. A friend who had barely spoken all night finally looked straight at your person and said, maybe the feeling had been real for much longer than they had allowed themselves to admit. No one argued. No one interrupted. The truth of it settled over the room, and for the first time, your person did not try to deny it. Instead, they took a slow breath and admitted something even deeper. Part of them may have known the truth long before that night. The real struggle was not discovering it. The real struggle was hearing themselves finally say it out loud. That confession hit with unusual force, because there is something powerful about hearing your own voice speak the truth you have been avoiding. Once it is spoken, it cannot be pushed back into silence. Once it is spoken, something changes forever. The night was almost over, But one final moment revealed even more.
Before the conversation ended, your person looked around the room and quietly admitted that if life ever offered another truly honest moment, they would choose different words than the ones they chose before. Not delayed words, not guarded words, not careful words made to hide emotion. Different words, honest words, words spoken without fear. Everyone knew what that meant. This was no longer simple reflection. This was the start of real change. Then the room grew quiet again, but this silence was different. It was not uncomfortable. It was not uncertain. It felt like one final truth was still waiting underneath everything. Your person sat there as if listening to thoughts they had avoided for months, maybe even years. When they finally looked up, the resistance was gone. One friend gently asked if there was still something left unsaid. After a long pause, your person admitted the hardest part was not learning what they felt. The hardest part was realizing how long they had delayed accepting it. That was the truth they had really been avoiding. Not the feeling itself, but the years of delay, the silence, the choice to look away. And once they said that, the meaning of the whole night became clear. This was not the end of a hidden feeling. It was the beginning of finally facing it.